Hello, everyone, and welcome to our coverage of the 2023 FIDE Chess World Cup. My name is Fiona Steilantini, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Grandmaster Jan-Ludwig Hammer. Jan-Ludwig, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to the game, and I must say, it's gonna be an interesting one. Hikaru with the black pieces, having played a good game yesterday, but not being able to utilize his minor advantage thanks to the Indians player impressive defensive work. Now I'm really curious. How is Hikaru gonna approach this game? Is he gonna go all out for the win with the black pieces, which often causes a risk for a loss? Or is he going to try and play it safe going into the tie breaks with the lower time controls where we know Hikaru is a beast?
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines as you. Of course, for Hikaru, it is frustrating. It was frustrating to be held to a draw with the white pieces yesterday. But as he mentioned in his video, that's what happens in chess when your opponent finds pretty much all the moves. Very often there's just nothing you can do. So today we'll see with the black pieces, indeed. What's Hikaru gonna go for? I don't know how familiar you are with his opponent, Kartik Venkataraman. He is the reigning Indian champion right now, and I was actually just commentating on his games in Dortmund a few weeks back. He was playing a close GM tournament there. And I remember actually, and just as you say that the game has kicked off, he lost a very spectacular game with the white pieces to Georgios Souleidis. Some of you might know him, a big German chess YouTuber and streamer, aka the big Greek chess. So we'll see. I'm sure Hikaru will have seen that game. That got very sharp very quickly, but we'll see. Does Hikaru go also for a more aggressive approach, or will he keep it safe? What are you making of what we're seeing so far?
It looks like it's gonna be a Queen's Indian defense. Hikaru going for that early hut for the bishop to place itself on the edge of the board. Now, normally we advise players to put their pieces in the middle, but the bishops are actually a bit of an exception. A bishop standing in the middle points out towards the corner, whereas a bishop on the corner actually often points towards the middle. So the bishops are quite unique pieces in that sense. And Hikaru here trying to get his bishop controlling the long diagonal, taking control of important squares in the center along the way. This does not have like a stellar reputation for being super aggressive, but it is a bit more uncommon than some of the alternatives here. For instance, if Hikaru had gone with his queen pawn 2 steps forward, that would be very traditional, putting pawns in the center of the board. This would be known as the queen's gambit declined, which is considered extremely solid and extremely common, and something the opponent probably is very well familiar with. Going with this fianchetto move instead, I think speaks to Hikaru's willingness to get a bit of an uncommon opening for these days. It's a very common opening, throughout history, but these days, not so much. And it also says that he wants to play solidly, but slightly surprisingly.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And your explanation, I think Hikaru wants to get a game here and try, if he can, to avoid going into a rapid and blitz playoff tomorrow. As you said, though, I think we can all agree that Hikaru would be a big favorite. Maybe even more so in faster time controls. I guess what he's trying to do is get a position with most pieces on the board and try his luck there, but at the same time keeping it safe, because we mentioned it yesterday. Let's not forget, if somebody loses here, and if that happened to be Hikaru, the tournament would be over. So that is the one thing to avoid, not take too much risk. So we had a few more moves here.
Yeah, so white goes for the same strategy, what is known as the fianchetto, but
Mhm.
in the opposite side of the board. So when Hikaru gets his bishop pointing down, white responds in kind immediately thereafter. And often we will see that these two bishops kind of annul each other's influence and often also get traded off. Here, the common move to play is bishop to e7, and in fact, Hikaru once played this against me. But he goes for a more uncommon opportunity here, which is actually advocated by the computer. Bishop to b4 check, an early check on the king. The check is easily blocked by the white bishop. Hikaru goes for the early trade. The queen takes back because you want to have this knight in towards the center, controlling two central squares instead of the potential only one you could have had if the knight recaptured. And then Hikaru castles. So very solid play thus far by Hikaru. But like you said, he's trying to keep some pieces on the board. He couldn't really avoid the trade of the bishops that he voluntarily went into by giving this check. But on the other hand, it has enabled him to castle quicker than his opponent.
So can you maybe tell us a little bit, because I don't have too much experience playing this, well, in fact, no experience playing this from the black side. What are sort of the long-term plans, especially in the center? I'm looking at the black D pawn, I'm looking at the black C pawn. Which of those is more likely to be pushed first to try and take some ground in the center?
Yeah, very good question. And if I was a top level player, I would be able to answer very convincingly. The problem is, this is you're kind of pointing out the trickiest part of this opening already. This is sort of a mix between the Bogo Indian opening
Mm-hmm.
and the Nimso in no the Queen's Indian opening. And so to borrow some of the plans from the Bogo Indian, which is when you go with this early bishop check, even earlier than what Hikaru did here, very often the plan would be, since you got rid of the bishop that moves on the dark squares, you
Mm-hmm.
then use your pawns to compensate for that loss of dark square control and put your pawns on the dark squares, especially now that those pawns would not then block the bishop's path. So this would be like a very normal way to play in a Bogo Indian, just putting everything on dark squares and especially having this dark squared pawn formation in the center. However, now that Hikaru has chosen to go with his bishop out on the edge with this fianchetto move, um, moving these two pawns up to the dark squares is less attractive since white now can push their pawn forward and completely block this bishop's path. And that's why I think the answer to your question is that if Hikaru wanted to push the central pawns to the dark squares, then he wouldn't have gone for this bishop placement. And as a result, I now believe he'll just push the pawn 2 steps forward to have more influence in the center.
Okay, very interesting. So d5, maybe one of the moves, not necessarily immediately, but plan that we're expecting. It looks like Hikaru's opponent has been slightly surprised, at least, by Hikaru's opening choice. Yesterday, it was a little bit the other way around. Hikaru not necessarily expecting the Archangels, even though Kartik had played it in game one of the World Cup, as he mentioned. And one thing that's interesting about the opening preparation is that yesterday when Hikaru came on the stream, he actually told us that he had first seen the pairings, like that the pairings were wrong on chess24 and chess.com, and they had him as playing black the first game. So Hikaru had spent most of 2 days ago preparing with the black pieces, and only in the evening realizing he was going to be white. So that was the one thing he was happy about last night when we talked to him. That, you know, most of the prep he'd already spent the better part of the day preparing with the black pieces.
Okay, but I do think there's a lot of significance to whether you get the white pieces or the black pieces first. If Hikaru thought he was going to have black in game one, then very often the strategy would be to play a very solid opening, try and make a draw, and then with the white pieces, you go for the win. So I'm thinking if Hikaru thought he was black first, that probably makes him prone to study a more solid opening than he would have gone for if he knew that, okay, I have black in game two, I need to be attentive to the possibility of maybe I'm down, maybe I need a win with the black pieces, or maybe I waste my white game and still want to be aggressive with black to try and decide the match in regular time.
That's, I think, a very interesting point you're making. And if we are joined by Hikaru later on, I will certainly ask him. I don't know if he's going to give us a straight answer, you know, as to did he stick with what he looked at 2 days ago, or did he mix it up somewhat? But that is, yeah, I think it's a great point. I think, you know, you talk about taking risk in these elimination events with only 2 games. I think Fabiano Caruana yesterday in his interview mentioned that this year he's trying to take a more consciously safe approach, because playing more risky chess has been quite punishing in his previous participation. So yeah, I think
And that probably also speaks to the fact that Fabiano trusts his ability in the shorter time controls more than he did in the past. And that's also something to be considerate of. That a player like Hikaru, who's just very, very, very good in tiebreak situations, who has extensive experience dealing with the pressure of a knockout tournament through playing the Champions Chess Tour and similar events. I mean, Hikaru might actively want to go for tiebreak situations, whereas someone like Fabiano, who has traditionally his strongest abilities within the regular 2 games, he was maybe more wanting to decide the match early on, or in the classical games. Very interesting decision here by Hikaru, and from a spectator's point of view, I'm very thrilled by this. Hikaru trying to make the decision with his central pawns. We discussed, does he want to put both of them on the dark squares or both of them on the light squares? Hikaru goes for pawn to d6, despite me saying that his placement of the bishop does not suit this plan very well. And the reason I'm excited about this is that even though it's a riskier approach, it's also an approach that's more combative, trying to keep more pieces on the board. Because if black now manages to get his pawn up and white blocks with their pawn, and we get a situation similar to this, then that leaves a lot of space on the left side of the board, on the king side, for Hikaru to try and grab with his pawns. And then white will similarly try and be aggressive on the opposite flank. So in general, when one player has a pawn more far advanced on one side, that means, okay, white is going to attack on this side, having the central pawn spearheading that effort. And then black's pawn, black has the most forward pawn on the king side, and so black will then have their focus there. So that could be a really, really thrilling development in this game. And I'm actually surprised Hikaru made this decision so quickly, because that was a huge decision on how to push the central pawns, and which one to get involved more quickly.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, do you think that this is still? I was thinking it's probably still his preparation. He hasn't really spent much time yet. I think 1d4 is Kartik's main repertoire, at least from the games I have seen. So most likely Hikaru decided beforehand to play this, I don't know what you want to call it, a Queen's Indian BOGO hybrid. But to play it in combative fashion, I think that other move you mentioned, d5 and putting the pawns on the light squares, would be much more solid. Another thing that's worth noting for our viewers is that even if Hikaru was happy to take this match to tiebreak, he could not offer a draw because there are no draw offers allowed before move 30. I'm not saying he would want to, but in some cases we have certainly seen players in the World Cup having very clear strategies of sometimes just actively trying to get to the tiebreak, not even really trying much in the two classical games. But I think here with d6, Hikaru has sort of given us an answer that even if he could offer a draw, he probably would not do that, because I think, as you mentioned earlier as well, would he want to desperately make a draw? It's more than likely he would have played something like a Queen's Gambit declined or something very solid along those lines. And so here we are, Queen c2 is on the board. And well, we just looked at Hikaru somehow getting e5 in as quick as possible. Well, I'm still looking at the knight on b8 as well. Does that just want to go to d7? Is also another question, is c5 ever a plan or not really here?
Yeah, no, I'm looking at it. It's actually the computer's suggested move, and I kind of just discarded it because I felt like, well, that's not a traditional BOGO Indian move. But like you said, this is not a BOGO Indian. This is a BOGO Queen's Indian hybrid. And the difference is this pawn on b6 and the bishop on b7. And that makes a huge difference, because now pawn to c5, traditionally, white would then actually capture this pawn. And after the recapture, there would be an open file for white to attack down. But since Hikaru has this b pawn involved, he can capture, recapture in towards the center, now getting an advantage with his 3 central pawns against white's 2. So the pawn break c5, way more tempting now with the support of this side pawn. And I think that's why Hikaru's spending some time now. I think you were absolutely correct. He was still in his preparation, but this queen move, which is strange, like the Karthik, he moves the queen for a second time without there being a clear necessity to do so. He still had an undeveloped knight. He could have sent this knight forward. He could have tried to improve his rook in towards the center, yet he decided to move the queen for a second time in the opening. And normally we try and advise players, don't move the same piece twice. And I think this second move of the queen has caught Hikaru by surprise. That's why he's thinking right now. And I think Hikaru's out of preparation. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Very often, the reason you're out of preparation at a fairly early stage is because your opponent did something that computers and other players do not consider a good move. Very often, if Hikaru hasn't considered the move in his preparation, it means the move is probably not optimal. And so we also see that here on the eval bar. The eval bar went from saying, I'm quite liking white's chances, to being like, why are you moving that queen again? That doesn't really improve your position.
Yeah, I'm very curious actually. I was trying to, make sense of Queen C2. What's the idea? But I've been struggling so far because I see that white has freed up the D2 square where the knight could possibly develop to, but I haven't yet found an answer as to why would the knight be better on D2 than on its natural developing square C3. And even if you're clearing the D file for the rook, I don't see the necessity for doing that right away. But Kartik also played Queen C2 relatively quickly, which, I wonder if black doesn't play C5, can white ever want to push C5 themselves? Surely not.
I think the main reasoning, not so much pushing the pawn again. That's once again moving a piece for the second time in a row. And now you're not going to be allowed to do so because Hikaru does play the c5 move, immediately putting more pressure in towards the center. And Hikaru now with good central control with his pieces. That being said, I think the reasoning for this queen move, I have been criticizing it, but there is a clear idea behind it. So basically, traditionally, when white develops the knight, black often has the plan of going knight to e4, attacking the queen and attacking the knight, going for an early trade, after which we normally consider black's position to be just fine. So Karthik, he wants to go queen c2 with the idea that afterwards, if Hikaru just moves his knight into the game, then knight c3 comes with control of the e4 square. And since you have control of this square, you can push your pawn up and have a very convincing central pawns moving forward. So there definitely was a plan to it, but Hikaru has prevented that with the immediate c5, making pressure in towards white's center, and now white needs to step up their game as suddenly there's action unfolding in the middle. Rook to d1 sees the rook pointing down that same file where the black queen is located. That's fine. And after pawn takes pawn, Hikaru played this very quickly. And basically, Hikaru says, if you want to capture back with your knight, yes, that does put your knight in a better position, but it also opens up between the bishops. And Hikaru makes the judgment that the trade of bishops, removing really the only defender close to the white king, should be beneficial for black. And very often you will then follow up with the queen finding a little fianchetto corner here on its own, both pointing down towards the white king, but also supporting the black pawns on the queen side. So
in those kind of situations, actually, if we get to this position, are we never worried that our pawn on d6 might become a weakness, or we can always play e5 if we're worried?
We're definitely worried about this pawn. But right now, the argument is that if you only look at the two most centrally located files, black has 2 pawns and white has 1. So yes, you're concerned about the safety of this pawn if the knight together with the rook kind of manages to target it. But you believe that you have sufficient resources to keep the pawn protected, and then you're relying on benefiting from your increased central control as a result of having more central pawns than the opponent. And actually, very interestingly, pretty much without thinking, white goes rook takes pawn, uh, clearly wanting to avoid more trades. White believes that the trades would favor black, make black's position easier to deal with, and he takes back with a rook instead, immediately pointing down on that very same pawn you were concerned about, Fiona. But also, if Hikaru now plays slowly, then white will be able to get both of the rooks working together, doubling down on the weakness.
Yeah, so that's the upside. The downside is that recapturing with the rook allows Hikaru's knight to come out to c6 with a tempo, hitting the rook. The rook would have to move again. But you know what's really interesting to me about this opening? I feel as chess commentators or as chess fans watching these high-level games, I feel we always want to kind of try and understand who sprung the first surprise in the opening, you know, whose preparation stopped first. And here, originally, I thought that Hikaru had surprised Karthik, but then playing this whole queen c2, rook d1, taking with the rook, basically without any thought, either this man is really brave and really good at bluffing, or this is something he has also still looked at.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's too early to tell. I think we'll have a better understanding based on the next couple of moves coming in. I'm open to both players still being in their preparation, although I'm almost certain Hikaru's out of his. But you're right, the quick decisions made by White on the previous two moves may suggest that he kind of had a little kind of calming thinking break just to be like, okay, Hikaru's going for the Queen's Indian today. That was unexpected. Let me rack my brain to try and think about what kind of ideas I have against this opening. And that could be why he spent some time initially, but then started playing quicker again. Because sometimes players will think, even if they're still in their preparation, because they're like, oh, well, actually, I have two preparations here. And I need to choose which one I want to have for this game, which one suits today's opponent better, or rather worse, because you want to beat your opponent.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And now we see Hikaru considering how to react to rook takes d4. I mentioned this move, knight c6, hitting the rook. I'm wondering if that is simply the move we want to play in general. If we defend the piece with tempo, that's usually a good idea. But I was wondering, did white want to somehow seduce black into playing knight c6? Is there a downside to the knight being there, or is this just perfectly reasonable?
There's definitely a downside, and it's not even that complicated to explain. The knight moving in means that the knight would then block the bishop's path, and the bishop no longer influences the center of the board. So in this opening for the black pieces with the setup, very often black wants to have the knight in front of the queen. However, that's not possible now due to the immediate pressure being put on the black pawn. So by capturing with the rook, Karthik is saying, okay, this is going to be kind of a waste of time for me, because I'm going to have to move that guy again when the knight enters the fray. However, you're then going to put your knight on a suboptimal square, and maybe the time I lose moving my rook is going to be compensated by the problems you encounter as a result of having your knight blocking your bishop.
Let me ask you, I was wondering, we're talking about this knight on b8, which very often wants to go to d7 to not block the bishop, as you said, but surely d7 is not the final destination. So I was just looking at the board and thinking, okay, where does this knight want to go? If I could, and often in my own games, I try to, if I look at a piece like that and I think, okay, if I could put that piece anywhere on the board, where would I want it? I don't know if here, you know, that would probably largely depend on how white is going to play, or if there is a square like c5 that we maybe want to aim for. Basically, what I'm getting at is after knight c6, yes, we close the bishop off for a second, but the rook has to move again. And I was wondering, let's say the rook goes back to d2. I was wondering, can we also then move our knight again? Open the bishop's diagonal immediately and try to jump to find a better home. But I wasn't too sure, you know, if I jump back to e7, I don't see much of a future for the knight on f5. It's not really clear to me what it would be doing there. So long ramblings short, where do you think the knight in general, is there a square on the board that the knight would like to head to?
Well, c5, you said it. I think that's the optimal square, and that may be the reason why the knight so often goes in front of the pawn. Number one, not blocking the bishop, like you said, but also just headed for one of the optimal squares on the board. Also, a very good square, e5. And sometimes you don't know where the knight is going to go, but when you have two good squares and one location the knight can go to where it then kind of sits pretty until it can decide, do I want to go e5, good square, c5, good square? Well, let's keep both options on the table. So there's definitely a logic to White's play in trying to lure the black knight away from the d7 square, from which it could then move on to these other ones. Where's my green? There.
Yeah.
Um.
So, okay, so let's assume Hikaru doesn't want to be lured into playing knight c6. I guess then we have to do something to make sure that d6 pawn stays defended in the future, because as you mentioned, knight c3, rook d1 will come very fast. I think as black, I would also like very much to get my queen on d8 out of the line of vision of the white rook. So I was thinking either queen e7 or queen c7.
Yeah, queen e7, I think definitely the only alternative Hikaru is contemplating. And then knight c3, good developing move for white, getting the rook ready. And actually, look at this, moving back to the position we had, Hikaru has indeed played queen e7. So Hikaru considers the time he wins attacking the rook to be less important than the problems then facing the bishop being blocked by its own piece. Very interesting. But then Hikaru goes with the knight to attack the rook. How do you explain this, Fiona? Why didn't he attack the rook first? Why move the queen and then go after the rook?
Can you not ask me something? A simpler question. It's still early, you know, it just started.
Well, you gave me a really difficult question about the placement of the pawns in the center. I mean, I feel like then it's fair game asking difficult questions in return.
I like how in the chat Vingado is saying makes no sense to me. I'm also struggling to make sense of delaying it one move, because I feel, okay, what white did, knight c3, that was always where the knight was gonna go anyway. I think after the rook came out to the d file, the knight was never gonna go to d2 and leave the rook out stranded in the center without the possibility of retreating.
Actually, I think I understand it, Fiona.
Yeah?
I think there's been one change in the position as a result of this very natural move, the knight coming into the game. The difference is now this knight is blocking the queen's path to the white pawn on c4.
Mm-hmm.
So, moving back to something you mentioned earlier, well, obviously the rook is going to have to step back, but now, contrary to earlier, Hikaru can move the knight away, spending another move with the knight because you said, well, okay, yes, I moved my knight to a suboptimal square, blocking my bishop, but I won some time on it by attacking the rook. And here, black can use the time they won by moving the knight yet again, this time attacking the pawn on c4, which is now undefended as a result of the white knight coming into play, blocking the queen's path.
But if white here simply defends with b3, I'm a little bit concerned about, we were talking about outposts for the knight. Now the knight on a5, okay, it's not easy for white to attack it, but surely that's not where our knight wants to stay, and I'm not sure how we're gonna get it back into the game if not via c6 again, or are we happy to see b3 and say, okay, now the dark squares on the queen side are a bit weakened, and maybe we can jump back to c6 and suddenly maybe to b4. I don't know if
I mean, we don't want to move the knight too much.
Not immediately.
Yeah. Well, I was assuming that the plan here would be something like d5, saying that pawn to b3 has lessened the protection of the white knight on c3, and that somehow we could try and get our rook pointing down against this now poorly protected knight and towards the queen. However, we can't really just give away that pawn. So maybe like rook here, and then we can try and push up and try and punish white for having this pressure allowed down the c file. And that would be a direct result of this pawn moving up to protect its buddy, because now the pawn is no longer protecting the knight. That being said, the computer is still reasonably happy here with the white pieces, thanks to a major trick, knight takes knight, which allows the black rook to capture the white queen because the knight is on its way to capture the black queen in return. So yeah, actually this somehow the trickery we tried to create, the problems we tried to create for the queen and knight just didn't cause enough trouble whatsoever as a result of this kind of very temporary queen sacrifice.
If we go back just a couple of moves in that line, just at this moment, I think after rook c8, there was another, I saw it briefly pop up, suggested by the engine, but it made me think it's probably something we need to watch out for in a lot of these positions anyways, that white has the possibility of playing e4 here, trying to shut down our d5 push.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to push. So my first kind of iteration of this was pushing my pawn forward first, but then I realized, oh, my rook is not in place to put pressure on the queen soon enough. But that is the case here. If you delay pushing your pawn up, then white gets this known as the Maroczy grip on the position, just being very aggressive with the pawns and trying to clamp down on black, trying to stop black's plans for pushing pawns forward. And it often leads to positions where black is fairly miserable because you're not able to push your pawns forward and you're not exerting influence.
Yeah, I feel like this position wouldn't be that much fun to play. I don't think black is seriously worse or anything. It's just, I don't think what Hikaru wanted today is a position where he just needs to defend passively and doesn't really have any breaks or any counterplay.
I mean, we thought before the game started, we thought, well, Hikaru has two different strategies. He can either be very aggressive, going for the win, or he can be very solid, trying to go for the tie breaks. A position like this would be a massive failure because it's both significantly worse for black, it's unpleasant,
Mm-hmm.
but it also offers absolutely no winning chances. Because white, worst case scenario, white just sits there and says, well, you can't really do anything because you can't push your pawns forward.
Exactly. Okay, we're still, of course, not at that point yet. I have to say, I'm curious. I'm surprised that Karthik hasn't played yet. I thought that Rook D2 would be an almost automatic response here, um, to be prepared to double up the rooks next. But I see that the engine is trying to make an argument for bringing the rook back all the way. And again, this is something that I'm slightly struggling to understand.
Yeah, just yeah, me too. It makes no sense to me. When you've already moved your rook up,
Yeah.
why would you abandon your opportunity to get those two rooks working together on an half-open file, a file where you have no pawns to block your own rooks? So yeah, I agree with you. This seems weird, but then again, Hikaru's decision to move the knight attacking the rook after first moving the queen, that was also weird. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what happens in these games is that when your opponent makes a surprising decision, you're not necessarily considering your own move. You might think, well, I'm definitely going to go rook to d2. That makes the most sense to me. But you're kind of investigating, um, why did my opponent delay attacking my rook until I had developed my knight? Are there any tricks here I should be aware of? Basically, it's a big red flag to the opponent. So even if Karthik is like, well, I'm definitely going to go rook d2,
Mm-hmm.
but Hikaru knows that that's obviously what would be my first instinct, and the move order Hikaru thought made, um, it gives me kind of like some vibes that maybe there's a trick. And
Mm-hmm.
so he's spending extra time looking for the trick. And yeah, at this point in time, we're not even sure there is a trick.
Yeah. But it is probably, as you mentioned, a sensible decision. They still have plenty of time on the clock. They've played the opening relatively quickly. It could also be that Karthik just now, or maybe just a move ago, sort of left his preparation. And I think those are moments when it's especially important, not just for these guys, but even for your own games. You know, if you leaving the known territory, at least territory that's known for you, I think it makes sense, even if you quite quickly feel, okay, I want to play rook d2. As you said, first ask yourself, why did Hikaru not play knight c6 immediately? The inclusion of the pair of moves queen e7, knight c3, what does that change? And also just to take stock of the position, because from now on you're going to be on your own. So I think it makes sense that he's thinking, and who knows? I mean, maybe he will surprise us and drop the rook back all the way. My money would still be on rook d2, but we will find out. Meanwhile, just a quick question. It was already answered in the chat, but I see that Whatnot was asking, if this game ends in a draw, will the last game be played tomorrow or today? So just a quick few words about the way the whole World Cup. So the way it works is if the two classical games end up in a 1-1 tie, then day 3 is always tiebreaks. There are always tiebreaks on day 3 because it's not just one last game. It could be, it could be almost unlimited. This year is the first year actually where they have scrapped the Armageddon. So the way it used to be 2 games of 25 plus 10. If still drawn, and remember, those games can easily take an hour and a half each. So tiebreak games, tiebreak days are usually quite long days. If they're still tied after the 25 plus 10, they move to 10 plus 10, so a faster rapid game. And if those are still tied, they move to 2 blitz games of 5 plus 3, I believe. And if they are still tied after that, before they would play 1 Armageddon game with white having extra time, but having to win. This year they've changed it. If after the 2 blitz games, the players are still tied, they will play blitz 3 plus 2 until there's a winner. So I'm very curious to see, I think, what was it, 2 days ago, we saw this match between, I always forget his name, Aiden, the local Azeri player, and some Chinese grandmaster. They were the only ones who went all the way to this 3 plus 2 sudden death. But yeah, basically that's the way the tie breaks work, and those are very long days. If you go all the way to this 3 plus 1, you'll be there for over 6 hours. So it makes sense that they're not gonna play that after the game. So I hope that sheds some light on the way the playoffs work. So if this game is a draw, we'll see at least 2 games of 25 plus 10 tomorrow.
So that could make for a very exciting day. In the meantime, Karthik actually did move his rook all the way back. So at this point, I'm stunned by a decision each from the players.
Yeah.
Very surprised by Hikaru choosing to delay attacking the rook in the center if he was going to do so anyway at a later stage. And then Karthik, the rook all the way back, avoiding the opportunity to double the rooks, having 2 rooks working together, putting pressure down towards the black pawn. Yeah, no, this is too high level for me to fully understand.
Does it mean that he wants to put the other rook to c1 and he doesn't actually want to double under the d5?
Well, I mean, now he wants to put the rook on c1, but that's not necessarily because he doesn't want to double. That's just because now that's the only good square for the rook, seeing as how the other rook is kind of blocking the corner rook's path to what I would consider an even better square.
Yeah,
The only reasoning I can think of is that maybe there's some instance where he wants to put the queen on d2. So I was looking at this. We're actually going to go back and look at something that could have happened, but sometimes the past is an important part of the present in chess, because if the rook had gone,
that was deep, Jon Ludwig.
I try.
Some chess philosophy right here. Listen up, chat.
So what could have happened here is knight to b5. Once again, the knight moving, attacking the queen. And when the queen moves, then Hikaru would have excellent support for this pawn in the middle. And if there's lots of trades, then it's very unfortunate for this queen placement, seeing as how the bishop will come in to attack the queen. So the reasoning behind moving the rook all the way back, it could be that now if the knight comes forward attacking the queen can step to the d2 square instead. And somehow this is better because now there's no kind of bishop coming in to attack the queen later on. Although even here, it seems to me that Hikaru has a completely fine position, pushing the pawn up in the center, having the protection needed for
Yeah, and just
all the pieces are protected.
Yeah, this I was completely convinced, and then I see the engine, of course, here suggests this move a3, which is always a little bit annoying, right, as black, because wait, sorry, how many? Because that would mean we'll end up with an isolated pawn on d5, right?
No.
No, actually it doesn't.
Well, the thing is, if the knight now moves back where it came from, that would be unfortunate. Because then, once again, the knight is blocking the bishop's path, and here the bishop's path is very much needed because of this pressure we created between the pawns in the middle. However, the knight can move to the edge of the board, and then it becomes a discussion of how problematic is it having a knight on the edge. And apparently the computer thinks that this position, being extremely equal in everything else, is actually problematic for black as a result of this knight being on the edge and unable to improve its situation coming to the c5 square, which is why white pushed the pawn forward, simply to limit the options for the black knight. That being said, it kind of looks okay for black because, well, black has absolutely no weaknesses in the position.
Having said that, Hikaru steered clear of any of these knight b4 and just brought his rook to c8, where the black rook is aligned with the white queen, also potentially putting some pressure on that c4 point in the future, and rook c1 played very quickly, and another quick move by Hikaru, rook d8. So we see all rooks now on those central C and D files, all looking at each other. Again, I'm very surprised at the speed that Kartik is suddenly playing. This b3 move, we can probably pause here because it's far from obvious. I was just gonna say, okay, now we get to the point, all the pieces out. Now we want to find a plan. But it looks like he's saying my first plan is to make sure that c4 pawn is well defended before anything else.
In general, this is a good idea. It's a good idea to have your pawns working together, protecting each other up the board. It's what's known as a pawn chain. And you want to create as many pawn chains as possible. However, here at the top level, timing is very, very important as well. And the timing here is off for Karthik because there was a very important threat that Hikaru was lining up. Pawn to d5 now will create the pressure between the two pawns in the center of the board. And if the white pawn is captured, now here's a big moment. You do not want to recapture immediately. This would lead to your pawn being isolated in the center of the board. It's isolated from the rest of black's pawns, meaning there are no pawns adjacent to it being able to protect it now or in the future. And we're always very cautious of having these isolated pawns. That being said, Hikaru still does push this pawn forward, but he has a plan. When this pawn is captured, Hikaru will not recapture immediately. Instead, knight to b4 fixes like 3 different problems at the same time. It avoids the isolated pawn because now there's lots of pieces instead of pawns to recapture in the center. The knight moving away attacks the white queen in addition to creating more attack on the white pawn. And also, look at this knight. We talked about this earlier, how this knight blocks the bishop's path into the game. Well, it also blocks the rook. And by playing d5, first Hikaru challenges one of these pawns that's also standing in the way of the rook. After the trade, knight b4 opens up for the rook, opens up for the bishop, and creates all of these attacks, firstly and foremostly on the white queen. When the queen moves away, then Hikaru can capture in the center of the board, and the position that then ensues leads to the rook being happy, pointing down, the bishop being happy, pointing down. But unfortunately, it also means that there have been a lot of trades of the pawns. And right now, this game is looking like it's gonna be an early draw. Right now, trades will be happening with these pawns in the center.
Yeah, and I was wondering that, right? Because as you mentioned, not only do a lot of pieces come off the board, but we also get a completely symmetrical pawn structure. Do you feel it's a position where there isn't really much for either side? Or do you think one of the sides can find some maneuvers to try and press a little bit in that
I
position?
think it's possible for a better player to create some unpleasantness, even from very equal looking positions. But, well, the thing, when I play, I always make some kind of dumb inaccuracy that puts me under pressure. But these guys, like for instance, Karthik yesterday, he defended brilliantly
Yeah.
in a game where he was under pressure, and here he's not even under pressure, right? He's the one, if anyone, who has like a slight advantage because he's first to get his knight forward at the end of all that big line we just looked at. So um, I think this game is going to end in a draw. In a way that's disappointing because we do want to watch as much chess as possible, but from a very strict, higher kind of like looking at it from the big picture, from the in the bigger perspective. Why is Hikaru in Baku?
Because he wants to qualify to the candidates tournament.
And why does he want to qualify for the candidates tournament?
To become the world champion.
To qualify for the world
to play the
championship
match
and
first.
then win the match to become world champion. Hikaru is not really like, Hikaru says he's a streamer, and he definitely mostly is at this point, but I'm not sure he's in the entertaining business this week or hopefully this month. Right now, his sole priority is maximizing his chances to become world champion. It's a tall task, but I do believe that Hikaru is correct that a draw in this game, having not been able to win the game with the white pieces is always going to be when you have the best chances of outplaying your opponent, or maybe like playing some good preparation to just blow your opponent out of the water. Having failed with the white pieces yesterday, he now feels that, do I want to go for a position where I'm probably slightly worse with the black pieces and somehow try to win that for a very long time? Or is it better for my chances long term that I play a fairly short game here now that Karthik has allowed black to release the energy of the pieces, right? A stronger player may not have allowed Hikaru to make this pawn break in the center, just trading all of the pieces. And Hikaru says, well, this will save me energy long term. If Hikaru makes it to the final of this event, he's going to be in Azerbaijan for a full month. So actually having some short days might be beneficial from an energy standpoint.
Yeah, and I think also from tournament strategy, right? Because this game, what are the odds that you're gonna play it for 3 hours and you're gonna win somehow? They're incredibly slim. If you play, you also run the risk that, you know, if you overpress, which I don't think he would do, but like you also run the risk that you might end up worse or end up under pressure, which you don't want to do. And I think the playoff tomorrow, that's 2 new games. So you take some, what's the term I'm looking for? I think playing 2 games as the stronger player than one where you're passive, or not passive, but I think
Black
black can never be better.
pieces.
Yeah, you're black, basically. So I am with you. I wouldn't be too surprised if the game today ended in a quick draw, and maybe we can go, that line you were showing, we can show it once again, the resulting position, just to explain why we think that's very likely to be a draw, maybe even quite soon.
And I mean, bad for ratings? I don't know about that. Because frankly, there's no better chess event than the lower time control ones with the rapid tomorrow. I think even if the ratings take a hit today in terms of, well, the broadcast not lasting as long as it would if Hikaru had a 5 hour game, it's compensated by the fact that Hikaru is going to be back tomorrow for the tie breaks
But I think they were
in some
talking
very
about chess
exciting games.
rating.
Oh, chess rating. Oh, Hikaru. I don't think Hikaru. No, we had a. Okay, fair enough. My bad. My bad. I haven't played competitive chess in a long. No, actually, the reasoning is I lost all my chess rating, so I had to stop caring about it to avoid, not, mentally going, yeah, going mad.
Yeah, I
But
was wondering, all right, where are you going? I thought at first that the point you were making is like, okay, he's gonna lose a bit of classical rating today, but tomorrow he can gain some rapid rating. I was like, that's an interesting
I
point. I'd never thought
he's
of
a
it that way.
streamer. We're back to that, he's a streamer. But when we talk about ratings, I assumed we talked about viewership, not chess rating. And what's that? No, I do think chess rating not actually a priority. He wants to be world champion. I think that's more important than rating. And so it's way more important to maximize your chances of qualifying to the world championship qualifier, aka the candidates tournament, than it is maintaining the number 2 ranking in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. So we're now 1 hour into this game. Karthik is still thinking about how to respond to the central pawn break with d5. So we're going to be taking our first quick break of the day, and we'll see you on the other side of this for the remainder of game 2, round 2. Hello and welcome back to our coverage of Hikaru's games in this 2023 World Cup. And Jon Ludwig, not too much has happened since we left off. We left here after Hikaru's central break with d5. When after quite a long think, Karthik decided to take, I mean, did he even have reasonable alternatives?
It doesn't really seem like he did. If he wasn't going to capture Black's pawn, then Black's pawn was going to capture White's pawn, which would be an issue. White definitely would want to avoid a situation where his pawns on the queen side get split up and are no longer protecting each other. This pawn on c4 would then be another showcase of an isolated pawn, a pawn that has no buddies adjacent to it, which means there are no pawns that can get in a position protecting the c4 pawn, which in turn would render it a big weakness, with Hikaru's army being suitably placed to exert pressure on the pawn. So Karthik, he really kind of had to capture on d5, but then Hikaru makes the good move, not recapturing immediately, but instead knight to b4, attacking the queen while also opening up for the bishop, for the rook, giving Black's pieces very good and lively positionings. The queen had to move away. Hikaru then recaptures in the center. And the phrase you used earlier, Fiona, symmetrical pawn position. That is the key phrase right here. Both players have an H pawn. Both players have a G pawn, F, E, B, and A. So there's no kind of uniqueness to either player's pawn formation, which is very often an indication that the game will be heading towards a draw, simply because there's not enough imbalance for anyone to exploit, for instance, a pawn that can be targeted or similar things.
Yeah, and before the break, we left you with the position saying Karthik might take here on d5. When Hikaru most likely would capture with the bishop, we might see more trades. After that, let's consider now what are some alternatives that White might have if he doesn't want to take on d5. I think one big question for Karthik right now is, does he want to take on d5 and quite quickly, you know, start the liquidation process, as we sometimes call it in chess, where as more pieces come off the board, I think a draw would be signed quite quickly. We will not, I don't think, see any ending played out for too long with the symmetrical pawn structure. So the question for Karthik is, does he just want to take on d5 and, you know, accept that the position is just equal? Or is there anything he can try?
Well, if he wants to try something, he needs to avoid these trades. So right now, part of the problem is that both of these rooks are looking at each other, which means we're very often going to see rook trades in addition to these knights looking at each other. And frankly, speaking of looking at each other, we also have these bishops on opposite sides of the board, but they're pointing similarly in the same direction. So right now there's a lot of pieces that are just prone to being traded off as a result of their positioning being vis-a-vis their counterparts. So if he's gonna try something, I think he needs to move the knight back to avoid the knight trade. But moving pieces back is not usually a good idea, and I would say especially not when you're facing Hikaru Nakamura, because he will seize that initiative and make you suffer for it.
For sure, and Karthik reached the same conclusion and captured on d5. We see that Hikaru is currently away from the board. We talked about bishop takes. I guess it makes no sense to take with the knight and block the bishop on b7 again.
I think that's the key. So bishop takes allows the bishop to still be pointing further on to white's half of the board. If you do take with the knight, then the knight will be blocking the bishop. The knight will be blocking this rook. It doesn't make. It also means that you don't have any pieces controlling the central e4 square. Whereas if you take with the bishop, like Hikaru just did, then you have two pieces controlling this square. So it's just a more harmonious way of making the pieces work together. Uh, and I once lost a position similar to this with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. And what Magnus taught me is that he thought it's quite important to control the open file the furthest away from the kings. So in theory here, um, in theory, Hikaru would like to control the C file, and that takes more priority than controlling the central file, the D file. And the way to make this happen is something like I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a bit like if the knight moves to the edge of the board, then you can trade the bishops,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can trade the rooks, and then Hikaru can claim, well, now I have supreme control of the C file. You're gonna have control of your own kind of thing, but then, according to Mr. Carlson, which is a concept that worked against me, so it's not without merit. It's good controlling the file furthest away
Mm-hmm.
from the kings,
And who are we
because
to disagree
yeah,
with Magnus? But this position, as you can see from the evaluation bar on the slide, the engine gives it 0 zeros. And I think
yeah,
that is one of the kind of positions that we talked about. You know, play might continue here a few moves. And there was a question in the chat just a second ago, can they make a draw whenever? No, they cannot make a move. There can be no draw offer before move 30. But often in these spots, you know, what happens in practice is, even from Hikaru's body language, I feel like, you know, I think he understands this is not a position from which he's going to press, and at the same time, he's not too worried that he's going to be pressed. He looks a little bit almost uninterested in the game, because I think very often these players just understand, okay, this position is just a draw unless there's a major blunder. But as you said, Kartik yesterday defended really, really well under tremendous pressure. So the chances that he's going to mess this one up from the white side are not very big. And so very often what will happen in those spots is either the players will start trading all of the pieces, and then in an endgame we might see a move repetition. So that's one way to make a draw before move 30. Or they can quite quickly play down to move 30 with just sensible moves and make a draw at that point. Knight e5 just been played by Karthik, offering an exchange of the light squared bishop. So we will see more pieces coming off the board because Hikaru cannot prevent the trade. Do you think you
well,
should take on?
technically he could prevent the trade.
Yeah, I was looking at that, but then I thought knight e4.
Well, knight e4 would prevent the trade of bishops, but then once again we're talking
Yeah,
about the knight blocking the bishop's
yeah.
path.
And the
And the
pieces
knight,
seem a bit awkward, right?
yeah, this knight is not
Yeah.
very well protected, and it could easily be attacked in the next phase. So yeah, I do think the bishops are going to come off. But we talked about earlier how this white bishop is one of the only pieces defending the white king. So I think now a bishop trade, very likely. But then The queen can come in, attack the white king, but also the queen, very importantly, needs to take control of the square c6. This square has become very important now because the white knight, together with the white rook, is targeting a long-term placement there. And if the white knight is able to establish itself in black's half of the board, that could be problematic for Hikaru. That could really cause some issues. So this is back to what I was saying earlier, that if anyone's better, it's probably white. And I said because white is the one to get the knight involved first. And frankly, I said that here, which was a confusing statement. But now that we've moved on to see what happened from this pawn break and the trades that's happened, we see that the difference is white is able to get their knight into the game before black gets off the mark with theirs. And being that one step ahead, being one step closer to getting into the infiltrating to the c6 square, that's going to be what gives white a little hope of success. Hikaru now captures the white bishop, and this is very interesting. Instead of recapturing the bishop, white goes rook takes rook. So Karthik is trying to provoke Hikaru to move
He's familiar
his
with the Magnus Carlsen concept.
precisely. Because here the white rook would then stand alone on the file furthest away from the kings, but also it would give the white rook a really nice way of supporting the knight trying to infiltrate to the c6 square. And that's why Hikaru recaptures with the queen. Good move from Hikaru, keeping the rooks pointing at each other on this c file. Hikaru then loses out on his opportunity to give a check on the king, but he makes sure that the white rook is not going to manage to take control of a file without the black rook. And in fact, those rooks were now traded. White then recaptures the bishop. And without the rooks on the board, white doesn't really have any hope of winning this position because the rook was needed to give support for the knight to get to the c6 square. And if the knight is not managing to establish itself here, then yeah, there's no hope for white winning. However, I will say that there is a way for Hikaru to reversely try and establish his knight on that kind of same square if we just looked at the board from a different angle. So right now, because Hikaru is the one to have the queen pointing down in the c file, I would say maybe there's some hope that Hikaru could try and get his knight up somehow.
Yeah, it seems a bit far-fetched that he could really get much, but it is an idea for sure. And I think, well, Hikaru is thinking right now King G2, so maybe that's the last thing he's checking. Can he get anything if he can somehow get to C3? I see, by the way, that meanwhile in the chat there's a discussion about, you know, the game strategy for this match. I see Nad is saying, I don't think this guy can beat Hikaru in any tiebreak format, so I'll welcome to the draw, to be honest. Which was responded to with the comment, Hikaru would have tried to play a Berlin if he was playing for a tie. The problem is it's hard to get the Berlin against one d4. I don't think actually that either player here, I see some other comments, white didn't even try. I don't think it was a case of either player coming into this match saying, I want to make a draw at all costs. I think Hikaru played something that is solid, but not solid enough that it kills the game immediately. We saw he tried to keep pieces on the board. And I also don't think that white played in a way that he was like, okay, let me just get this to draw. I think it's just sometimes what happens.
Well, we saw one opportunity earlier on in the game I'm going to just rush back there. White had the option of capturing back with the knight, which would be the normal way of playing if you were going for a draw, because capturing with the knight immediately creates a trade between the bishops. And normally, you know, if you're wanting to make a draw, you want to make trades. So I'm very much with you on this, Fiona. I think it was just a fairly well played game where neither player was able to disturb the equilibrium. I would say maybe it was the case of a mistake here, though. I do think the move b3 from Karthik was unattentive. He didn't really pay enough attention to Hikaru's plan of liquidating. And it would have been interesting to see him play something like pawn to e4 instead, where he tries to go for the Maroczy formation, trying essentially to just prevent Hikaru from pushing the pawn up in the middle and freeing himself of White's little pressure White has because the pawns are more aggressively placed. So I think I think maybe there was one mistake from Karthik that allowed Hikaru to equalize the game fully. But it was not like neither player was really going for a draw. It just happened to be the result of the best moves when Karthik made this mistake of allowing Hikaru to break free and really open up for his rook and bishop for that central trade.
Absolutely. So while Hikaru ponders his next move, Jan Ludwig, I have a question for you from the chat. I think it was prompted a little while ago when you talked about your game against Magnus. As cool as beans was wondering, wait, does Hammer still play professional / competitive chess?
He does at times, but very unsuccessfully. I played in the Norwegian Chess League this year, and I lost to Magnus. I had like a great position, and then just self-destructed. I also played the Norwegian Championship this summer, actually, and I was the favorite to win that. Well, together with Ariantari. I wasn't even fighting for the medals. I did so poorly. So yeah, I am still playing. I'm just not playing enough to play chess well. Does
It's I
that
think
make
that
sense?
makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense. I think these days, if you really want to be competitive at the top, that has to sort of be your main focus. And I think, you're doing so many other things, a lot of commentary, a lot of content creation. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
I don't know. I still think I'm better than what I'm able to show at the board, but no one really cares about, your theoretical level. They care about what you're able to achieve while competing, and that hasn't been yeah, that hasn't been
Follow-up.
great lately. Yeah.
Moving on swiftly with a follow-up question from Dutchy. Do you like playing these leagues or matches, or is it not fun?
I like I like preparing. This is a weird thing. I enjoy preparing for chess games way more than I enjoy playing chess games. But it makes a certain sense as well because competing is very, very stressful, whereas just studying like chess openings and stuff like that is much more relaxed, and it can be very fun if you find, interesting chess fun. And it's a lot easier to do than competing because you can just turn on the computer and let the computer do most of the work, and then you can just sit there in awe saying, oh wow, chess is a really, really good game, huh?
I mean, I can completely relate to that. I think I play even a lot less, and of course I'm nowhere near your level, but I can relate to You know, playing, I think we all love chess, and playing is fun, but it also can be very unfun. I mean, this year I've only played league games, and I had such a crushing loss in a very important team match in March that I feel I'm still not over that, you know? So it's like, yeah, I enjoy playing, but sometimes I return to the board and I'm like, oof, you know, it's going to take a while. So it's
Chess
a
is,
tough one, yeah.
yeah, no, chess is a very tough game because it's all your fault. If you
Mm-hmm.
lose, it's all your own
Mm-hmm.
fault, and that really, yeah, it messes with your ego.
Yeah.
Um,
Meanwhile, we
speaking,
have knight d7 on the
yeah,
board, yeah, and we just had the question, is this a dead draw? I think if white just takes, if he wants to, surely that is just a dead draw, this queen ending.
yeah, but I can't imagine him not taking.
Yeah.
Um, this is like we had some very vague hopes that Hikaru could come out better if he somehow established his knight on c3. But Hikaru is saying, well, White's knight is more aggressively placed right now, so I'm gonna make sure that the White knight cannot cause any troubles by trading it off. And with that, Hikaru is also saying this is gonna be a draw.
Yeah, I think knight d7 is what we call in the jargon a silent draw offer. He didn't actually accompany his move with a draw offer, he's not allowed to anyway, but it is saying, look, if you take, I know we're going to make a few moves and shake hands very quickly. Knight queen d4 doesn't really change much because Hikaru can now take on e5 himself. And I think it's clear from that last move, knight d7, Hikaru is happy to just make that draw today. And I think it's such an important point you made about energy management. I mean, the World Cup is the most grueling, maybe together with the candidates tournament, the most grueling event on the tour. So Hikaru has so much experience. He's such a strong player. He knows that once he realized there is not much more, nothing more in the position than a draw, let's make that draw as quick as possible and preserve some energy.
And he's yeah, well, he's not making, well, actually, if you're only going to be looking at the computer, this is going to be pretty much a perfect game from Hikaru, right? He's played this very well, but the problem is perfect game in chess often just leads to a draw. Hikaru now making sure that all his pawns protect each other on the left side of the board. He also created space for the king so that there's no back rank checkmates. And now Hikaru is gonna somehow try and, I don't know, maybe he just puts his queen in the center of the board, then pushes his pawn up on the side. Then his queen can protect this guy, that guy can protect the next one. White is a little bit better here. White has the queen more centrally located, and white also has the king further up the board, which means that the king can be a bigger contributor than black's king. But it's not going to be enough to really influence the game, because if you try and exploit that your king is able to get in to the game, well, actually, here the king could technically try and rush up for a checkmate.
How did we manage to engineer that?
Well, I
But
mean,
can I
because
not? Mm-hmm.
well, the white's king was a little bit better
But even if
placed.
you go to g5, can I not just play king h7?
Yeah, and then maybe I continue with my king on a big adventure.
That is quite an adventure.
Yeah, no, actually, the only kind of piece here that's well, this pawn on f7 is super important because
Yeah.
it's holding everything together in two directions. So if we move our king away, then the king is no longer protecting here. I mean, this shouldn't be a problem.
Mm.
But I mean, you could imagine situations in which white wins.
Oh, for sure. For
With the
sure. I
king
mean,
infiltrating, this queen is very well placed in the center. And now there's a threat of checkmate.
I absolutely take your point, and I think I would, I could very easily underestimate something like this, and suddenly the king is on g5, and I'm like, oh God, what have
And
I done
Karthik
again?
does play king f3.
I mean, ambitious until the end. You gotta give him that, Kudos to Karthik. But yeah, my
Yeah,
point
but
was
this can also be like a strategy. I feel like Magnus Carlsen, the player I'm most familiar
who's
with,
watching
watching
the game
him.
right now, by the way.
Yeah. So I think one of Magnus's major weaknesses is when he thinks he has everything under control.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gets lazy and inattentive. And I feel like maybe that's one of the tricks to beating a much better player. You lull them into a false sense of security,
Mm-hmm.
and Hikaru's like, well, I can make any move here, that's going to be fine. And then boom, you rush up with the king to try and get a checkmating attack using only your king and queen working together.
Yeah, so my point was gonna be I could very easily, if I was playing black here, I might already start to feel a little bit of stress at least, because there's no clear-cut way of stopping the king's path. Um, but I'm relieved that it's Hikaru playing and not me, and I figure that he's just gonna find a way, to deal with that
Well,
idea.
I'm guessing he's going to go like queen d7 now.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes a lot of sense to me. Because number one, then the queen takes control of this square that the white queen may want to use. It protects the pawn in this direction. And it also gives black the option of moving the king in towards the middle as well. So the key thing here to avoid is do not try and get your king into the middle like white has been doing, because then queen here, check on the king has to move, and then your queen is in trouble behind. So that's the only, well, it's not the only thing. Also, you need to be aware that a queen trade at this point would be very detrimental, seeing as how the white king is winning the race to get over to the other side of the board. So two things to avoid: queen trade and queen blunder. But queen d7, okay, queen b7. Well, the reason I didn't like this is because now, if we try to use the same plan as we did with queen d7, my intention was to go king f8 next. But here then, okay, computer says now king g7 and king g5 is winning for white.
That's
Uh, I,
crazy.
I was thinking something like this, and the king comes in via the center.
Which
But yeah,
also looks scary, to
yeah,
be honest.
this is also problematic. Um, okay, so and also the benefit of queen d7 was that I thought it prevented king f4, because
Because of
if
queen
king
check.
f4, then queen comes in, check, and the queen both checks the king, but also controls the square behind the king. And if now pawn forward, then we manage to capture a very important pawn, and we can, worst case, we can trade queens with a pawn up afterwards to avoid checkmates.
Yeah.
So I definitely preferred queen d7. And
So
now it's
now the
going to
question
be,
is what after king f4, yeah?
yeah. And of course, whether Karthik is brave enough to go for it. Because
I think
like,
he will actually. Because you never really, I mean, especially with the queen on b7, right? From b7, you're not gonna get into trouble immediately because the white king is playing on the dark squares, the black queen is on the light squares, and there it is, king f4 is on the board. And now Hikaru
Yeah,
immediately responds with queen
that
e7.
was a quick move from Hikaru, and clearly he had planned this. Clearly he felt like he had it under control. Queen to e7 takes the g5 square under control, meaning that the king may not proceed at this moment.
I think there is a chance the game will end here with queen b8, king g7, queen back.
Yeah, something like this.
Yeah.
Just go back and forth. Sounds fair enough. Because the one plan White had of infiltrating with the king, I got stressed out there for a little bit, but apparently it wasn't such a big deal. Like the queen protects the g5 square, and the queen protects the a7 pawn, and that's kind of all. That's all we needed.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, even if white is more active, white has the more centralized queen. With no targets, there is nothing white can do here. Hikaru can basically just sit on this position. And I think king f3 is also an invitation to play queen b7 check and repeat the moves here.
Clearly. But now it's intriguing for Hikaru to try and punish. What about queen to a3? There's there's one way for white to protect this pawn, but there's only one way. The only way to protect the pawn is playing the queen all the way back, which doesn't feel all that good. That being said, it also does allow for the white queen to attack the king, and when the king moves, the queen attacks in towards the pawn, and if the king protects the pawn, then the queen attacks the king until the king no longer protects the pawn. And yeah, it's gonna be a draw. It's gonna be a draw, but for a little moment there, we thought that maybe white can utilize the more aggressively placed king, and we have now been convinced that is not
Hikaru
the
does
case.
go for queen a3 and the immediate response queen b8. And I think that will be that. The problem, as John Ludovic was highlighting, is basically the black king is on its own now. The queen on a3 is far away from the action. It attacks a3, but it makes it impossible to come to the defense of the black king. So we will see a repetition here, and it's already in the works. We'll see a handshake in a second. So that's it. A draw has been agreed. We see the handshake there on the camera. Well, actually chess.com gave the draw automatically, but we see in this case, because of the 30 move rule, the arbiter has to come and validate the result, but there's the handshake. And that means in his first round of the tournament, which is round 2 of the World Cup, Hikaru's match ends 1-1 and will go to playoffs tomorrow.
Yeah, which means the match didn't really end, did it, Fiona?
The classic
the match
portion
continues.
The match continues
with a 1-1 score.
You got me there. So tomorrow we'll have more action. For now, don't leave right away, because we are going to see, will Hikaru join us again? What are his thoughts on the game?
And how are some of the other games going?
Maybe we can do that immediately.
We'll take a round looking at some of the other games.
Yeah, so let's start maybe with Magnus, because yesterday actually Hikaru's game was so intense that I think we only looked at Gukash's game, which was spectacular. In case you missed it at home, make sure to check out that game. Many already hailing it as possibly the game of the year. Spectacular stuff, but we didn't see Magnus's first game. He won against Pansulaya. Let's see how he's getting on in game 2.
Very, very complicated play here. Pansulaya from Georgia, the country, not the state. He lost with the white pieces yesterday, and that's just such an awful position to put yourself in against the best chess player in the world. But he's gone very aggressive here, trying to strike back in the match. Pantzulaya keeping Magnus's king uncastled for the time being, which should give some chances to try and win the game. That being said, Black has one pawn less than the opponent. So Pantzulaya, with a pawn's deficit, needs to make something happen here, with the queen pointing down on the king, the bishop pointing down, matching the queen's diagonal on the c3 knight, and also right now rook to d8, a potential move coming in to attack the white queen, force the queen back, and then comes the moment whether or not Pantzulaya can strike with all these pieces pointing in dangerously towards white's position.
But kudos to him, you know, even with the black pieces, he doesn't roll over. He's trying to play for a win, not just, you know, get a result against Magnus. And yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, this position, a lot could still happen here. Looking at it initially, I would prefer to be black in a sense, but just because the king on e1 doesn't look like it will be safe in the near future. So kudos for Pantzulaya. Just very quickly to respond to a question in the chat, Till Nater was asking, are women allowed in this event? So there are basically two World Cups going on at the same time in Baku. There is the Open World Cup, which we are following, and there is the Women's World Cup as well. Women are allowed to play in the Open, but there are none playing this year. I think they have in the past some of the women's world champion. I think maybe Hu Yifan or Zhu Wenjun, one of the two, I think, played in the Open World Cup someday. But now the system has changed a bit as well. So in the women's event, there's also, I believe, 2, or is it also 3 qualifier spots to the women's candidates. So yes, women are allowed in the Open World Cup, but there's none of them playing this year. If you want, you can go to the chess.com events page and find the Women's World Cup there. Jan Ludwig, maybe we can take a quick look at Wesley So's game, because yesterday Wesley was under tremendous pressure against Emre Can, and I saw a comment maybe half an hour ago or so in the chat that Wesley is in trouble again today. Yesterday we didn't see any of the big rating favorites lose, but today, you know, all those who made draws could potentially be in danger of going home if they were to suffer a loss. But this, at first sight, maybe Wesley managed to stabilize. I don't know, do you want to go back a few moves to see?
It looks to me like Wesley was, and maybe still is, under some pressure. The reason for that very much revolves around the black pawn on c6. Now, this black pawn is on a file where white can put the queen and the rook, and potentially in the future another rook and more pieces. So you often want to be careful about such pawns that doesn't have another pawn to defend itself when it's on such an exposed open file. The result of this is that Wesley has had to choose a passive placement of his bishop. This bishop is basically doing the work of a pawn, just making sure that the pawn stays defended. But normally a bishop would be worth more than a pawn, which is why it's bad that the bishop has been relegated to such grunt work. That being said, it's doing a good job. And right now it does seem like a lot of pawns are being traded, and that black may survive despite the unpleasantness of having the rook and queen pointing down.
By the way, chat, great news. Hikaru will be here with us in just 2-3 minutes. So do not go anywhere. We will be hearing from the man himself his thoughts on today's game and on tomorrow's impending rapid playoff. So that will be very interesting. Make sure to stay tuned. And yeah, just we were getting towards we were almost at the live position in this Wesley So game. So let's just give our brief thoughts and then we can go back to Hikaru.
Yeah, it seems like Wesley is still under a little bit of pressure, but we've seen Wesley being incredibly difficult to defeat in the past, and as such, I do think he will manage to defend this one, but I don't think he's going to win it. And Wesley then may be in the same situation as Hikaru, needing to take it down in the rapid playoff. And Wesley maybe with not as good of a feeling as Hikaru because he's been under pressure twice in the classical games, whereas Hikaru was very solid with black, no problems whatsoever, and he did pose a lot of problems with the white pieces. So that psychology may also affect the games and the player's state of mind a little bit.
For sure. Actually, let me ask you very quickly this, although I believe Hikaru should be here any moment. Do you feel that the quicker time controls always favor the favorites, or do you think it can be dependent? I mean, of course, it's never always going to favor them, right? Because some players are really specialized in faster time controls, but overall, would you say it favors the favorite more greatly than the classical format?
Obviously, the better player will have a much easier time winning games in the Blitz and Rapid playoff because more mistakes are bound to happen. But they are also more severely punished for smaller mistakes they make. So I think it increases the chance that a lower rated player makes it through in general is my impression, because yes, the higher rated players are better in Blitz and Rapid, but they are also prone to making a mistake once in a while, and you're more likely to make a mistake with shorter time controls.
Absolutely. And as you guys can see, we are being joined now by Hikaru from Baku. Hikaru, thanks for joining us today. It ended up being a very solid game in the end. We'll ask you, I think, in a moment if that was the intention, but for now, can you just share with us your first thoughts on the game?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, obviously, I mean, when you're playing 2-game matches, generally you try to push as hard as you can with the white pieces, and with the black pieces, you tend to try to be a little bit more solid. I mean, that being said, I did surprise my opponent. I played this Queen's Indian, which I've only played during one event in my life, which was, of course, the Candidates in 2016. And it did not go very well for me at the time. I think I lost to Levon. I think I lost to Sergey. I mean, it was pretty much a total disaster. But I thought I would play it as a little bit of a surprise. But you know, like anything, when you're playing with the black pieces and your opponent wants to be solid, if they don't take risks, it's very hard to create anything. And I mean, it was just a very boring kind of game. I don't think there's there's a whole lot that I could have done really, other than maybe not play this opening. But you know, it's kind of what it is.
Actually, let me ask you a question immediately about the opening, because yesterday in the interview, you mentioned you had, mistakenly prepared with black at first the day prior, but then yesterday's game ended up being a draw from the white side, you playing with the white side. Did that impact the preparation you had done the day before, or maybe you can't give away too much?
I mean, it changes some things for sure, but I wouldn't say it changes too much. That's where I think I would leave it. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, when you're playing with the black piece, you just try to surprise your opponent. And really, this game, I mean, really hinged on one critical moment. If we go to like move 10, I think, after c5, like, I mean, basically in this position, it's actually, I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's the same kind of pawn structure as in the game between Pansulaya and Magnus yesterday. And I remember watching that game, or I mean, I've seen that game in many games in those lines. There always are situations where if black plays c5 against d4, c4, white can play like d5, white can also take on c5, or white can play something like a knight f3 or rook d1 to allow the trade on d4. And just structurally, I mean, if white doesn't imbalance it's very, very hard to get anything. And I mean, I also, instead of c5, could have played bishop e4 too, but he can also force a draw there. Bishop e4, he can go queen c1. Bishop, and I have to go back to bishop b7, and then you go queen c2, and it's a quick draw. So I mean, I also knew that I could have done this as well, but I figured this is just simply too much. Not even playing a game here against someone so much lower rated. So that's why I played c5. But when he played rook d1, I mean, I thought everything I did was probably correct. I don't know what else I could have done after rook d1. Maybe I don't take. Maybe I can play like queen e7. And try to play like knight c6 and force him to go d5 or d takes c5. But even if I get queen e7, knight c3, and I play like knight c6, I wasn't 100% sure here after knight c6, for example, if white goes d5, what exactly is happening. I mean, maybe I can do this, and it's actually no, computer hates it. So maybe it was smart of me not to go into this. But I mean, that's always the big question mark, is whether I want to like go into this or not. And it can be very, very double-edged. Like either it's completely fine, I'll get what I want, or it can backfire completely and you lose the game. And I think when you're playing in match formats, unless you're in a must-win situation, generally it's better to try and avoid that, unless it's like, say, a blitz game where players don't have a lot of time. So I think the decision I made was correct. It's just, I mean, there was just nothing I could really do. It's just very, very boring. And also, I mean, I have to go for this whole d5 idea.
Can we just ask you here in this moment after rook takes d4? This was a moment that we were a bit curious about. If you played queen e7 here, right?
Yeah.
And we were wondering why queen e7 before knight c6.
I don't think there's actually a reasoning behind it. I think it was sort of that I wanted to keep the idea of d5 alive. So like after queen e7, for example, knight c3, maybe I can play d5 here, or maybe I can go rook c8 and then d5 or something like that. It wasn't like a concrete idea in terms of why I didn't do it, though. It was sort of just like, it was just that maybe there's some extra alternative. Because once you put the knight on c6, it's fixed. Like you can't go to d7, your knight is stuck on the c6 square. So you don't have any, you lose all the flexibility of other possibilities here. Okay,
that does make sense. I'm sorry, you wanted to get to a moment.
Yeah, I mean, like even here, like I don't want to play d5, but if I don't go d5, I'm probably just worse. That's the problem. I mean, if I don't play d5 here, I'm actually just a little bit worse. So, like, I mean, I'm surprised. Computer says I can play a6, and maybe it's okay. But even after a6, if white does something like queen b2, I don't know what I'm doing. There might be e4 as well, but yeah, knight a7 and it's fine. But of course, knight a7 is, shall we say, it looks a little bit ridiculous. I don't even understand. I mean, I guess the point is to play for b5. I mean, this is just like, this is too advanced for a puny human like myself. Like knight a7, and I mean, this is just like, this is starting to border on the edge of stupidity, for me. So yeah, it's just not. I mean, I don't think it's realistic. And yeah, once I go d5, it's sort of, we get a symmetrical pawn structure, and I mean, if anybody can be better, it's white. And like even later on, I didn't want to play knight d7, but I think I have to be a little bit careful here. Like if I go queen c5, which is my initial intention, there's queen d2. And I don't know if I mean, I'm sure this is still a draw, but as you can tell from the bar, it's a little bit scary here potentially. Like I guess h6, queen d8, king h7. And knight f7 doesn't work because of what? Knight e4? Wow, knight e4, e3, queen c2, and I mean, I guess this is okay, but yeah, like again, like to allow this, like at knight g4 even? Knight g4, knight g5. Okay, I mean, this is getting a little bit too, this is getting way too deep. And also because again, if I make a mistake and I lose the game, I mean, I'm just done. Like it's really that simple too.
But it also really showcases how a very innocent looking position can have such rich tactics luring under under the surface. Like this variation was some of the wildest things I've ever seen.
Well, I mean, I think for both you and me, we've played a certain guy by the name of Magnus Carlsen a few times, and he finds a way in positions that look very equal and boring to create complications and win a lot of games. So I think that for me at least, it's not too shocking. But also the thing is, you just want to be careful because it's very easy to fall asleep at the wheel here after like queen takes after king g2. Very easy because like if white can get queen d4 and some b4 b5 for example, or even f3 e4, it can get very scary. So it can get kind of scary here, and you just like I'm sure it's still a draw, mind you, but you start to worry. You start to worry quite a bit about some possibilities. So yeah, I didn't want to play knight d7, but I figured it's just you have to be solid and not go too crazy here.
And after knight d7, were you at any moment concerned in the slightest when you saw his king come out, or you had immediately seen you were going to stop the king?
I mean, it's hard to believe that it can be anything special because even if you leave the queen on c8, like I go queen c8 here, for example, just say queen c8, white still can't get in. After king g5, I just go queen d8, king h6, queen f8. So like I wasn't really scared at the end of the day. But yeah, it just didn't seem like it was really that I didn't see any way for him to break through, and I knew that in a queen and pawn endgame with symmetrical pawns, it has to be a draw. Basically, that's what I knew. Like without any other pieces, like even if he gets a big center, I can always just guard the pawns. So I knew it had to be a draw of perfect play.
Okay, and so while the draw was agreed a few moves later, there's a question in the chat from Aaron123. Hikaru, what are your thoughts on your opponent Karthik? Were you impressed by his play?
I mean, today's game, it's really hard to say anything kind of at all, just because it was such a boring game. I mean, I don't think either of us. I mean, all the moves we played in this game, we both could have played them in probably 30 seconds, honestly. I think what I would say is yesterday he defended quite well in a very dangerous position. I definitely had a lot of pressure, but he found the best moves. So he defended quite well yesterday, and I mean, I think if anything, I would say it seems like he's probably a little bit underrated. I don't know, like how underrated he is, but I would say that just in general, there's certain things he did very well in the game yesterday in particular, which I won't sort of elucidate on right now, simply because of course there are more games tomorrow. But I would say he's playing better than in 2560. That is for sure.
Having some additional questions about what you just talked about, Hikaru. How important is it to have an understanding of your opponent's style before playing a match against them? And does it influence, for instance, your opening choices? And is there anything else than openings it could influence, like decisions during the game?
I mean, certainly it can if you know your opponent very well, but the good thing for me going into this match, at least, is very clear that my opponent is playing openings that he doesn't play. Like he clearly has been preparing for this event, and so he's playing openings that are completely different from what he normally plays. So from that standpoint, even if I had some read, it would be very difficult. But that being said, even before I played yesterday, I had a feeling he was going to start playing openings and variations that he doesn't play in general. So I knew I would be surprised. I think that it does help, though. I think now going into the rapid, I have a pretty good idea of what I think he's good at and what he's definitely not very good at. So there's certain situations where if I can get into those types of positions, I think it will play quite a big role. But at the end of the day, I think you just have to play good chess.
By the way, Hikaru, Hazard27 in the chat is asking the hard-hitting questions. First, he asked, Hikaru, what are you going to do tomorrow? And he followed that up by asking, what kind of opening are you going to do in tomorrow match?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Obviously, I have a lot of time to prepare now since it's pretty early. So, I mean, I'll just probably do some casual light preparation. I don't know what exactly I'll play yet, but I'll figure it out as we go. And then what am I going to do tomorrow? Was that the other question, or today?
Yeah. I think he was basically asking, what are you going to play? And then realized his question wasn't accurate and rectified it.
Well, I mean, the good thing, at least about Baku, is that thanks to the US dollar being so incredibly strong, and frankly, the Azeri Manat, and also I was in Istanbul before this, the Turkish lira being so weak versus the US dollar, everything is so cheap. So actually, I've been going out, like I've been taking the Uber. It's like $1 to like it's $1 to use Uber and just get around the city. And I've been here before, so it's not my first time. So I'll probably go out, have a nice dinner tomorrow. Maybe I'll go out. We'll see what the plan is exactly, but. It's pretty cheap, so I just take Uber and I'm going out into the city instead of simply staying at the hotel.
Do you have a big support team with you in Azerbaijan?
Not particularly, no. As always, Chris is here, my second, and my wife, of course, Atusa is here, and that's about it. But the funny thing is, in the third round, I could play one of my other seconds, which is Nicholas Huschenbeth, the German Grandmaster. He's also here. So it could be like if he gets knocked out by Navarra today or something, maybe I'll add him to the team and we'll see. But I guess he's here. Shankland. I mean, maybe I don't even want to talk to Sam if he doesn't win today because he's obviously going to be gutted. But that was my team for the candidates. So so both Nicholas and Sam are here. So maybe one of them will stay a bit longer, perhaps if I go deep, but. As of right now, it's pretty standard, just the usual crew.
Yeah, well, that your ambition to maybe take on even more opening helpers, that kind of tells me that you are very serious about qualifying to the candidates from this tournament. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Um, well, I think everybody saw my look. I mean, if I go deep, sure, but again, that's not even on my radar, honestly. I just want to play good chess. It's like I think a good example of this was during the Bullet Chess Championship after Daniel Naroditsky lost his match to Magnus Carlsen. He basically said that his goal in the Bullet Chess Championship was just not to get embarrassed and be competitive, and that's pretty much my attitude with every tournament that I play. I don't really think about winning it. I don't think about qualifying. I just want to play good chess and not make a fool of myself. And if I do that, I'm happy. Of course, it rings kind of hollow because everyone sees me do well, and then you think, well, I mean, he's just making this up, and obviously he's taking it super seriously. But no, I just want to play good chess, and if the results happen, they happen. But yeah, thinking about the candidates or anything like that, I think is very bad, especially especially early on in the tournament. Because as I said yesterday, I think this event is all about nerves. It's all about the nerves and controlling them. So I think as you get deeper in the event, the nerves play a huge role. I think, again, to use a classic example, I think it was 2 years ago, Sam Shankland was playing, I want to say in the quarterfinals against Sergei Karyakin. And I think in the regular match, he won the first game, and then he lost the second classical game. I think in the Rapid, he won the first game, then he lost the second game. I think in the Blitz, he also won the first game, and then he lost the second game. And like when you look at a match like against of players at that level and the caliber they can play at, you don't just lose games randomly. It's very clear that nerves play a massive role in the later matches. And so for me, like as I'm not really thinking about it because I think when you start thinking about it, you put too much pressure on yourself and bad things happen. So for me, like I said, I'm just here to chill, play good chess, and hopefully I do well. If I don't, I don't. But that's life.
You mentioned, just a quick question, you mentioned Sam, Nicholas, both having been part of your team before, both are still playing. There's so many games happening in this World Cup. Yours ended quickly today. Are you going to follow some of the remaining games live, or do you just take a quick look in the evening when everything is done?
Well, I mean, the first thing is it was pretty funny because I saw Nicholas's game against Navarra and I saw the opening, and it's a line obviously that he and I have worked on a lot. And so I passed by the board and I almost started laughing because it was something that we've looked at. And so I was curious to see if he would get a good position out of this Berlin. I don't know. His position looks fine. I don't know if he's better, but it looks pretty decent actually. So I guess we'll see. We'll see if he can win. I don't think he's going to lose it at the very least, but I saw that I did walk by Sam's board. Sam looked pretty unhappy from the get-go. I don't blame him, obviously, because I mean he had this horrible loss yesterday, and he looked kind of sad. And his position today looks pretty sad too, actually. I mean, his position is playable, but how is he going to win this? I don't know how he's supposed to win this. I mean,
Yeah,
white can always go f4, rook d6, rook d1, or reroute the knight to d4, e2, d4. Yeah, I mean, I mean, this is part of the problem when you're playing against players above 2,500 and you have the black pieces. It's just a miserable task trying to win the game if they aren't principled. If they just want to be rock solid, it's very, very difficult to win without taking massive risks.
Actually,
it's difficult
sorry,
making a guy be principled when he's leading the match already, having won with the black pieces. Like,
yeah, also true. I mean,
did.
because like another example is like even Magnus's game against Pansulaias, where Pansulaias tried to play very principled and tried to go after Magnus, as opposed to trying to be super solid. He tried to go after Magnus, and of course it backfired. But again, if Pansulaias had wanted to make a draw, he probably could have. If he had tried to just kill the game around like move 10 or move 11. But he didn't want to. He wanted to be principled with the white pieces. So that's also why when we talk about this event, there is a lot of luck involved in the event. Because like it depends, if you get the right opponent at the right time, they want to be principled, they want to go after you. You can actually win games with black. If they want to be very boring and make a draw, it's very, very difficult unless you take some risk. So that's why a lot of people consider it a bit of a crapshoot, for lack of a better word, with this whole event, because you can get the right opponent, you can get the wrong opponent. I mean, there's so much luck from that standpoint, if you want to call it luck, but it is what it is.
Do you think ability in Blitz and Rapid is one of the, together with controlling your nerves, is the key ingredient to winning an event like this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think. I mean, I'm sure someone can go and look at historically speaking, but I'm guessing that from round 4 onwards, the number of players who are winning matches like in 2 games and not in tie breaks is very, very low. I feel like almost all the matches end 1-1, and you go to the tie breaks, and it becomes actually who's the best at Rapid as opposed to classical chess. So I think that it does play a big role as you get deeper in the event. And I know the thing is, nowadays I'm a little bit older, but when I was younger, everyone's saying, well, Hikaru can just draw 2 games against everybody and just beat them in the Rapid and the Blitz, beat them in the tiebreakers. And somehow it's never really worked out that way. I've generally always won my matches in regulation or lost in regulation. In fact, it's funny. It's funny. I don't know if I've ever been eliminated from a tiebreak, now that I think about it.
That sounds pretty good to me.
Well, because I'm just thinking back, like in 2019, I lost in 2 classical games to Nasipianu. Before that, I lost to Elyanov in 2 classical games. I lost the second game. What did I play before that? I have to go way back into the annals. I lost to Fedosave in regulation. So I was always losing like in 2 classical games.
So the
like
people saying that you can just draw your way into the Rapid tiebreaks are actually right.
Maybe. I mean, we'll see, obviously, but it's kind of funny because I can't think of a match that I lost in tiebreaks in the World Cup. I think I always lose in regulation. So, and no, I'm not jinxing myself, you guys. Not at all. So, but
just a final technical question about the playoffs happening tomorrow. For the first time, FIDE have gotten rid of the Armageddon game, replaced it with infinite 3+2 blitz games until there's a winner. Do you care? Do you have any thoughts on that? What were your thoughts on Armageddon?
I mean, I think if you get to that stage, everybody's played so many games already that it feels kind of unfair to have Armageddon. On the other hand, I mean, if we get really deep in the event, I think there's a world where you could have a bunch of blitz games. I think there's a world like if you have like Magnus versus Wesley, for example, I think you could have something like 6 blitz games. You could just keep going forever, or like Anish and Magnus. But I mean, I think in general, Armageddon is kind of, I mean, it feels kind of wrong on one hand to have it be decided by a result which isn't decisive because you haven't lost. So it doesn't really make a huge difference for me, but I think it's probably for the best.
Okay, well, hopefully we don't see you go all the way there tomorrow. Your thoughts, you've been playing quite a bit of Rapid and Blitz lately. Does 25+10 Rapid, is that a time control you would say you enjoy playing?
Not really. No, I like the fast Rapid. I would say 15+10. I much prefer to the slow Rapid. But it is what it is. At any rate, yeah, it should be interesting. Obviously, I have played quite a few tie breaks in the World Cup before, so I am used to it, and just kind of have to play good chess and see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, Hikaru, thank you so much for joining us today, and best of luck for tomorrow.
Yeah, and just to finish it off, of course, I will do a recap for everybody who's wondering. So, yeah.
Very good. So there's something else to look forward to today. If you haven't seen it yet, chat, you can also check out yesterday's. So yeah, unless there's anything Jan Ludwig you still had or Hikaru, I think we're gonna let you go.
Yeah, it was good being here, and I, of course, tomorrow should be a lot of fun, more content, so it'll be exciting.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to it. Thanks, Hikaru, and best of luck.
Thank you so much. See you guys soon.
See
Bye.
you. Bye-bye. Okay, so those were Hikaru's thoughts on his game on tomorrow. It was really nice to have him here. What we are going to do now is we're going to go on a short break, and then we will come back and take a look at some of the games that are still going on. Are there any favorites that are in danger of going home today? We'll take a look after a short break, so we'll see you on the other side of this. Hello and welcome back to our coverage of the 2023 World Cup. If you have just joined us during the break, you missed the end of Hikaru's game. Hikaru drew the second classical game against Karthik Venkataraman and will be going to playoffs tomorrow. So tomorrow, same place, same time. I was gonna throw in some time zone on Ludwig, but then I got, what is it, 6 a.m.? No, 7 a.m. Eastern time, right? I think.
Yeah, or 1 p.m. in the only time that really should matter, which is the Norwegian Oslo time, along with most of Europe. But speaking of Norwegian and Norwegians' interests, here we have Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces against Levon Pansulaya of Georgia, the country. And Magnus is actually down a pawn. His situation in the match is still looking good, though, because yesterday he was able to win with the black pieces. But Pansulaya really trying his very best to upset the reigning Rapid and Blitz world champion in Carlsen. And I gotta give him credit.
I'll be back. I poured myself a big glass of water and realized I left it in the kitchen. I'll be back in 10 seconds.
Fair enough. While Fiona gets her water, we're going to see if Magnus, needing only a draw, can make that draw out of this position down a pawn. And one of the key elements here is that the Black King has been unsuccessful in castling. And right now, the king will not be able to castle on the next move either. And Magnus, by moving his queen up, putting pressure on the black rook, that rook is well protected by the black queen and the black knight. However, if you castle now, that would be a huge mistake. Because the white rook would sacrifice itself to take out the knight. You would think that's okay because we had two pieces protecting the rook, both the knight and the queen. However, if the queen wants to recapture the rook, the queen will then leave the protection of the black rook, leading to Magnus winning the game with an extra knight. So, yeah, Pansulaya up a pawn, but his king is in trouble. It cannot castle. And that's an issue with the rook pointing down on it.
If this was not a World Cup game with the stakes, with a draw being enough for Magnus to move on, if it was just a regular game, would you rather play the white side or black side of this?
I am generally very fond of pawns. So it's very rare that I say I don't want to be the guy with the extra pawn. But this might be an exception, Fiona. I do not like the white rook pointing down on the black king. And I especially don't like that the black king is unable to castle. So I'm going to say here, having to make a decision, I would prefer to have the white pieces, which bodes well for Magnus here, since he has the nicer position despite the pawn deficit, and he also only needs a draw to proceed to the next round.
Yeah, I have to say I like this position a lot better than the last one we had seen where White's king was still stuck in the center. So I think Levon put on a valiant effort
I don't
today.
know about that. I thought it was. I think he's been playing very aggressively and very bravely. And I do see your point about how did the Black King get in trouble when the Black King was so well defended and White's King was under so much pressure. But it's also thanks to Magnus's play. So Magnus here was up a pawn, but his king was in trouble. And so he prioritized getting his king into safety, but he gave away two pawns in the process. And I feel like that's pretty well played by Carlsen, that he gives away not just one, but two pawns, going from a pawn up to a pawn down, but manages to turn the tables on the king situation.
Yeah, I mean, very instructive play by Magnus here. And we're gonna move on now. I don't know if there's a game that
I
you
have a
haven't-
suggestion,
Okay.
but it's very egotistical, but bear with me. So we just talked about the ultimate time zone, which is of course Oslo time, and we looked at the Norwegian number one, Carlsen. I'm gonna put us into the Norwegian number two,
And
Mr.
actually,
Aryan Tari.
maybe we can start our look at this match with yesterday's game, because I think Aryan played what for me was one of the moves, maybe the move that caught my eye most yesterday, apart from maybe Gukash's game, but very nice stuff. In case you missed it, I think you'll enjoy this one.
So here, the players were going back and forth with the rook and king. The king moving up towards the center, rook coming in to pressure the pawn, king moving back. And it looked as though this game was going to end in a draw. But Nguyen, with the white pieces from the Czech Republic, he decided he didn't want to draw. He wanted to try and play on, and he used his rook to protect the white pawn instead. After which Aryan, with a brilliant bishop to e4, gave away his bishop for just a white pawn, but he was able to chase the white rook out of position, allowing the black rook to come in, check on the king. The king had to retreat, and then a third pawn was captured within the a 3-move time period. And Aryan was able to win with these central pawns making their way up the board. And winning with the black pieces in this format is just such a big thing. And so he has a tremendous opportunity to make it through to the next round, which I think will be the furthest Aryan has ever made it in the World Cup, but also means that he may face his countryman Carlsen in the next round.
Yeah, that would be a great clash, one that you will be keeping a close eye on, I'm sure. But in order to get there, Aryan has to not lose today. He's playing with the white pieces. And let's take a look at this position now.
I mean, to me, it looks good. White has nice pawns restricting the opportunities for black's pieces. And so I thought, well, this looks good. But I'm looking at the eval bar, and the eval bar actually prefers black's position, which comes as a bit of a surprise to me. That being said, look at the time situation. Nguyen is down to just 14 minutes, despite us only being halfway to move 40. So the time management from the players here has been awful, simply.
You never want to shy away from saying things as they are, and I love that about you, Jan Ludwig.
Well, I mean, they started out with an hour and a half, and now they're at the halfway mark. So that means logically at the halfway mark, starting with an hour and a half, you should have 45 minutes left. And 14 minutes is significantly lower than 45. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see how this one plays out for Nguyen. Since you made a personal request, I'm gonna do the same. I would like to see the game of my good friend Niels Grandelius.
I mean, as a Norwegian, I'm not sure I'm supporting watching Swedes play chess. But let's pop into it. Grandelius with the white pieces, he has a rook deep into enemy territory, pointing against several black pawns at the same time. But I'm also noticing, look at these pawns. And normally you want to have your pawns next to each other so that they can work together and defend each other, like these black pawns. For instance, if black goes forward here, the pawns are defending each other. That is not something Nils has going on. So I would say probably black is for preference as long as we can make sure no damage is caused by this white rook. And I'm seeing the move rook e7, trading off that aggressive white rook that does seem to yield black the advantage in this game.
Yeah, I think Niels should be able to hold this, but I'll give you this. I didn't pick the most exciting game, I guess, that is going on right now. I saw there was one request in the chat. Since I only saw one, maybe we can grant that.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. I first just want to mention very quickly that Pragnananda has made a draw with the white pieces in game 2. And that means since he managed to win with the black pieces in the first game, in what I am being told is the game to look out for.
Yeah, check it. Have you not seen it?
I haven't.
Okay, then let's show it. I think our viewers will enjoy this a lot, especially if they missed it yesterday. So
wow.
Lagarde, I mean, he is no stranger to, you know, unconventional chess. He loves to go on the attack, but here it kind of backfired when he didn't care so much as his king safety, but instead started throwing those pawns up the board on the king side.
I kind of like it so far. I like the aggressiveness at the very least.
Spirit.
Yeah. Okay, so he pushes up. His queen gets attacked. His queen just starts targeting the king. I mean, so far so good. Ooh, but that move, that's gonna, yeah, no, that is a massive blow. White thought that the knight couldn't move here because the rook had control, but it turns out when you capture this knight, you allow the black queen to get into the heart of your position.
But
Ooh.
all of it relied on this e3 move.
Wow. So if takes e3, you're not actually threatening anything.
Yeah, I think knight e2 here was
no, the queen is trapped even. Wow. So you needed to go e3 first because now if knight to e2 attacking the queen, then the queen can sacrifice itself going for the queen trade. And the big idea is that after the queen trade, the white queen is no longer there to protect the white rook, which means at the end of the day, black has won a rook for a knight. Wow. But what if we just move the rook? Could we not move the rook?
Yeah, we looked at this yesterday. Let me remember. Was it bishop?
Bishop g4.
G4, I think.
Can you imagine?
Right? No, it wasn't. I'm misremembering.
Yeah, no, this pawn is quite crucial.
No, bishop c5. Actually, that's the move I even made Kanti guess, and then I forget about it.
Simply just protecting this pawn, but then the queen is getting trapped. Okay, the queen can get out, but like you're forcing the queen trade when white has an extra knight. And somehow this attack is ongoing? Wow. Wow. Yeah, no, this game is something.
Yeah.
So knight d1 instead, trying to get rid of this guy. King, okay, just a little bonk cloud to make the game extra cool. Yeah, oh wow. And he just gets his pieces into the game quicker and somehow this queen doesn't get trapped. Look at those rooks pointing down on the white king. This is wild.
By the way, I have to apologize. I kept saying earlier the Gukash game, but I do know the difference between Prague and Gukesh, so I think I just got because I think Gukesh yesterday broke into the top 10 for the first time in his life. So I knew
Wow.
something was happening with both of them, but I confused them early on. So my
Cash
apologies to
is top
Prague.
10?
Yeah.
Wow.
He's coming for that #1 India spot that Vishy has held for a long time. Let's just say that.
This game is still interesting because 3 pieces for a queen is quite a lot of material. But the problem is the queen just keeps attacking the king, and white couldn't keep their king safe. And so Prague kind of trapped the king in the center of the board. Yeah, that was a great game by Prague, and he's now through to the next round as a result of making a draw today. The reason I wanted to stop by Prague is because I believe he is the most dangerous player on Hikaru's side of the bracket. I was looking a bit at the how the chess World Cup, how the who plays who in the knockout stage, and I saw that Navarra, like Hikaru mentioned, he's a potential opponent, but also Prague being one of the most dangerous ones to deal with. Also, if Hikaru and Magnus win all their games, they will and all their matches, they will face in the final. So I also thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is, I think, very cool. I think if, I think a vast majority of chess fans, if they could pick a dream final, that would be it. It's a long way. We're 3 weeks away from that happening. So we'll see what happens. And maybe we can quickly revisit Wesley. So we saw his game earlier.
There
He's
was
one
a
of
viewer request that
no,
I kind of overruled.
okay, sure, let's do that.
I thought you had it.
I had one. Yeah, that wasn't it, but the viewer request was Yesipenko.
Yesipenko. Okay. So these two players made a draw in their first game yesterday. And to me, here it looks as though white is somewhat better because black has this pawn in the middle that cannot be defended by other pawns and that are pretty easily targeted by white's pieces. However, the computer actually prefers black's position, and that's probably because of this pawn on the side of the board being ready to move forward, kicking white's bishop out of position, and then there may be some threats down the b file. So a combative game, but not
Nothing
the
too crazy.
most crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, Safari also under some time pressure. So we'll see what happens here. But I saw, yeah, that Wesley might be under some slight pressure. Well, he was I think, always under some slight pressure in today's game. But I think for now he's the biggest name at risk of going home today.
So here, equal amount of pawns. Wesley making a counterattack against the white pawn on b4. If Wesley is able to capture this pawn, then the only remaining white pawns will be on the king side of the board. And very often when there's only pawns on one side, that is an indication that the game is gonna end in a draw. Pretty much, even if you have an extra pawn, if all the pawns are on the same side, it lends to the opponent being able to make some fortresses. So right now, I'm very curious about this move, knight to g5. Knight to g5 would threaten checkmate on h7. So we don't have to be concerned about the black bishop capturing the white rook, because then we have the checkmate supported by the knight and bishop together with the queen going in for the final kill. But also, if that checkmate is prevented with the pawn blocking, there's a very intriguing sacrifice here. Rook takes knight. And when black recaptures, the bishop comes in to lend even more power to an attack targeting Wesley's king.
This looks terrifying. Looking at it from
And
Black's
the worst thing
perspective
about this
without...
for Wesley is that he loses the knight that was supposed to kind of clear the danger by taking out the last white pawn on the queen side of the board.
Yeah. What do you think? Wesley in big danger today?
Yeah, no, this variation we just looked at is very straightforward. So to me, it looks like he is in big trouble. Yeah, I'm not sure what. Yeah, he missed these ideas with the rook coming in, sacrificing itself, the knight coming for the checkmate, opening for the bishop. It's just very nice tactics. Yeah, Wesley is in real trouble here.
Yeah, so this one, I think, a big game to keep an eye on. Wesley, who's known for being so solid. He is not one of the guys, you know, if you thought one of the big dogs is going to go home early in the tournament, I would never pick Wesley. I think no, he's way too solid. He barely ever loses. I think he's very good at rapid and blitz. So we could have a big shock on our hands. And as cool as beans, actually, I was going to suggest that as well, because we talked about how Gukesh just broke into the top 10 live ratings yesterday. If he wins again today, he will actually overtake Vishy Anand in the live ratings, which will be massive, because I think I read that Vishy has been #1 for, if I'm not mistaken, 37 years or something.
And it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. Gukesh is going to win this game. He's up a rook to a knight. And he also has a very clear plan here of continuing his attack. So basically what has happened here is the kind of opening where white has these pawns and you just try and push them as far as possible. But then in return, black has 3 versus 2 on the opposite flank. And so black tries to push their pawns as well. I have no idea how Gukesh ended up with a rook for a knight. That seems very favorable. But in addition to that, the simplicity of the plan, just pushing the pawn forward, is very nice for him. And I would expect something like pawn to c5 to be followed by pawn to g5, and just have this pressure pushing forward. And the computer says this is absolutely devastating. And even if a white temporarily wins a pawn, the significance here is that these black pawns make their way forward and start creating an even stronger attack together with the queen against the white king.
And I think that win would really be quite historic, because Vishy, I think some people don't realize, was the first ever Indian GM. You'd think, you know, Vishy is not that old. Surely there were others before him. But I think Vishy really inspired so many generations of Indians. There wasn't, you know, they didn't have any big players in India before Vishy. And for Gukesh to overtake him in the live ratings today, aged only 17, I think that's a big change of guards for someone. You know, Vishy will always be a monument. He's a legend of the game. But for another Indian player to overtake him, I think is quite momentous. Is that a word? Momentous?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. Especially because Vishy is actually doing commentary in Baku right now, so he will be commentating on this moment live. So enough about Gukesh. Another player who has a lot of fans in the chat is Mr. Vasil Ivanchuk.
And there was some controversy surrounding Ivanchuk's participation as the World Chess Federation uh, went out with a plea to the Ukrainian government to let Ivanchuk play. Um, but apparently things were resolved, and Ivanchuk is playing, and he's playing with two bishops pointing down towards the black queen side. It seems to me like white should be quite a bit better here, yet the computer not really giving white any advantage. I don't understand that. How can you have such nice bishops and not have the computer be thrilled about your position?
Yeah, also control over the d file. I mean, what is there not to like? Is there anything black can do immediately?
Yeah,
Very
I'm not
confused.
sure I get it. Oh, wow. Well, actually, okay. Now I get it. I just
Now it
needed to
makes
rewind. They're about to go back and forth. The bishop targeting the rook moves, the bishop back targeting the rook again, the rook moves, and these guys are about to make a draw. If the Chilean grandmaster here plays the bishop back, that's going to be the same position for the third time, and that's going to be an instant draw. And the reason he's thinking about it is because I guess he's considering whether he wants to go for the win. But how can you do
I
that with
doubt it.
these
I think it's
bishops?
probably just the case that the arbiter is already. I mean, I'd be shocked if black wanted to play on here.
Well, not shocked if the guy was losing the match.
Yeah,
I
no,
guess.
of course not.
But these guys made
yeah.
a draw in the first game, so a draw here would take it to tie breaks.
And actually, a game you have on your screen right there, we were just looking at the legend Ivanchuk. Unfortunately, another legendary player who I think might be going home very soon is Boris Gelfand, who's playing against Ferenc Berkes.
Birches at the lowest rating I have ever seen him. I actually played on a team with him in Denmark one season, and I complimented him for just his incredible stability. He had been like 2660, 2670 forever without ever like having a bad result. I see now that the Hungarian grandmaster has
The hammer
dropped.
jinx.
Yeah, he has dropped quite a bit, but he still knows how to play chess. He's about to take down a higher seeded opponent, and it's not an ordinary opponent by any means. It's the former world championship challenger, Boris Gelfand, who competed for the world championship with Vishy Anand back in 2012, I want to say. And yeah, computer is saying that this is over, but Gelfand is literally a pawn up. White has an extra pawn, but black has a lot of pieces closing in on the white king. And there's also the problem of this bishop cannot move. And since that bishop cannot move, the queen needs to protect, but that means now the queen cannot move. And the knight cannot move because you need the defense around the king. I'm not sure how you win this, but honestly, just push the pawn up next seems pretty good. If I just make a neutral move, there are no neutral moves. Maybe.
You're
Maybe.
almost in Zugzwang, yeah? It's some
Yeah, like
weird.
queen a1. Yeah, so I was gonna say maybe you just push the pawn, and that's the computer's recommendation. I wonder what if bishop here? Is this like some? Would this be some weird way to win with the bishop blocking the queen's defense, just destroying the white formation? Like everything apparently wins for black, even this cute idea. Gelfand is just completely tied down with all his pieces. and that means having an extra pawn not really benefiting him when he cannot move any of his other stuff.
Yeah, a very sad position for Galfand. Sad to lose him so early in the tournament, of course, but kudos to Bekic, who seems to have played a fantastic game here with the black pieces. And Jan Ludwig, I wanted to take you to a player who, incredibly, I have never heard of, and I think he's about to send home, or not about to, but he's pressing against David Anton. I'm talking about Abdullah Gadimbaila, a local Azeri grandmaster. I just looked him up, 21 years old, maybe one of the only players on the in the field to be rated under 2500 at this point. He drew game 1 yesterday, and he is pressing today with white.
Yeah, there's a black pawn that's very deep into enemy territory, but the consequence of being that adventurous is that you now have 3 guys wanting to capture you, and one of them did. The white knight comes in, captures the black pawn, also giving additional security to the white pawn in the center. And yeah, white just has an extra pawn for really nothing good in compensation for David Anton.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's Anton might this might be his last game of this event.
Are you familiar with this Grandmaster Gadimbaili?
I can't really say that I am, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is to my defense or maybe just showing that this isn't really something I'm good at. I didn't really know Hikaru's opponent either.
I didn't know him until I commentated in Dortmund last month. I'd never heard of him. I was very surprised actually at the time to find out that he's the reigning Indian champion.
Yeah, no, that was a
Yeah.
very nice trivia.
Mm.
So yeah, no, the reality is that there are a lot of people in the world who's very good at playing chess. And sometimes you haven't heard of them and they're still, winning stuff. Speaking of people who you haven't heard of and are winning stuff, what is this? Uh,
Wow.
actually, maybe this is not this round. Because
Yeah,
I've
but
been Googling. But yeah, there's a Peruvian IM who beat Demchenko. I'm pretty sure this was in the first round,
Mhm.
in the previous one. But like
Oh,
an
yeah, yeah, yeah.
example of people you haven't heard of coming in and beating established players. Demchenko, I believe, is a former European champion.
Mhm.
So like yeah, there's a lot of good chess players around the world. Now this is kind of inspiring me to find out how is this Leiva guy doing in today's round.
Let's see. So he drew game 1 against Salem Saleh. Today he's playing on the black side. At first sight, it looks like, white has this pressure on the G file, which looks quite unpleasant. The black pieces don't seem very well coordinated. You're wondering, what is that rook doing on H5? Also, the pawns on E6, E4, double isolated. But on the other hand, you have opposite colored bishops. So if black can get to an endgame, that would be good news. But I think in general, what they say is when one side has the initiative, actually the opposite colors favor them. So based off that, I like white's chances, but John Ludwig, your assessment.
I don't know. I think this is very unclear. Yes, white has a clear plan of pointing down towards the black king, but black also has a clear plan here. The previous move, rook to h5, is actually just a little bit of a square maneuver for the rook to get back into defense as to offer more protection for that pawn in front of the black king. And black's bishop here, it's kind of being blocked by their own pawn, but at the same time, it could lend some pressure in towards the queen side where black is planning pawn to a4 next. So like bishop f6, attacking, rook back, defense, king away so that the next rook can join in, and then pawn to a4. Is this some idea? Okay, computer hates this. I guess sometimes the simple crude plans are good enough. But I mean, to my mind, I feel like black has a lot of ways to try and defend this key pawn. And then black also has something going on the opposite flank. I don't think this is very clear cut at all. And I'm very impressed with this Peruvian who's come in and taken down a big name already. Now the question is an even bigger name in Solemn. Could he do it again?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, one of the revelations, we were just looking at, this Azeri play, and I said he must be one of the only players under 2,500 still in the field. I'm pretty sure that Leva must be the only one under 2,400. So impressive stuff by him so far. We'll see if he can hang on. I was going to suggest either check back in with Sam Shankland, who suffered. Did you see how Sam lost yesterday?
I did, yes, but maybe we'll
let him off the hook.
We'll review it for our.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say we're gonna spare him that.
Oh no. There are no friends in chess commentary. So
that's a good saying. I hadn't heard that one before.
So Sam captured the pawn, thinking that, well, the guy gave a check on my king. Now I can capture a pawn. But that was a big mistake because the black rooks coordinated beautifully against this white king. And here it looks as though, okay, if the rook goes back, the king can maybe hide out in the center of the board. But instead, rook to c3 was a devastating move, realizing that the white pawn trying to become a new queen is not going to be an issue with the king trapped in the center. And just Sam made one mistake, but after that mistake, the game was just over instantly. His king could not escape. And as such, a devastating loss for the guy who Hikaru mentioned in his post-game interview with us as being a member of Hikaru's opening assistance team during the World Championship qualifier in Madrid last summer. And Hikaru was saying that if one of my helpers get knocked out early, maybe they'll come join my regular second, Chris Littlejohn, and try and help me make it further in this tournament. So Sam Shanklin right now in trouble, having lost with the white pieces. Sam now needs a win with black to recover. But yeah, no, this is Hikaru was talking about Sam's position when he was on, and he was saying Sam's position looks awful. But right now, it has definitely improved with Sam having the option here to capture a white pawn to try and get that bishop into the game. Computer doesn't like it immediately because white will recapture, but you can definitely imagine some kind of circumstance. Maybe rook here attacking the pawn in the center. The only way to protect that pawn is to move the knight back, but then the knight is blocking the rook, which leaves the bishop free to grab a pawn. So I feel like Sam definitely has some stuff going on here with his pressure towards the f3 pawn and the pressure against the e5 pawn. He's still in the running to win this game, which would take the match into tiebreaks.
Absolutely. And for Sam, I mean, going home here would really be heartbreaking. I saw he tweeted before the event saying, you know, he's played so many games and events in his life, and he's always been able to shrug off every single loss except for the one match that Hikaru mentioned that I think it was the semi-final, right? World Cup semi-final against Sergei Karyakin. He wrote on Twitter, that one I will take to the grave, but he was really optimistic about this new World Cup. He said, you know, ready to give it my all, something along the lines of that. So going home here in the first match he's playing would certainly be heartbreaking, but he might still have some chances here. But you'll have to continue following that on your own, because we are now going to take just one final look at the other second that Hikaru mentioned. There was Sam Shankland and there is Niklas Huschenbeet from Germany. So we'll check that out, and that is going to conclude our coverage of today's World Cup action.
Yeah, and Nicholas, he is the underdog against David Navarra. And Hikaru mentioned this game for two reasons. Number one, because Nicholas has worked with Hikaru in the past, but also this is a potential opponent for Hikaru further on in the event. Hikaru may face the winner of the match after. These guys are in Hikaru's bracket. So
I think not the next match, but
yeah, we're not going to
four.
get ahead of ourselves. Hikaru still first needs to win the tiebreak tomorrow.
And then another match.
And then he needs to win another match, and then he may face David Navarro or Nicholas Huschenbeet, amongst others. So it is a game worth spending some extra time on. That being said, I do like Navarro's position much better now than I did in the past. Last time we looked at this, Huschenbeet had just moved his bishop up to put pressure on the Black Knight and the Black Queen, but Navarro doing a great job of getting out of that. And right now we have a situation where bishops are traded. Computer prefers white here, just a little bit, but to me it looks very equal. And it's likely that these two, just like Hikaru and Karthik, will have to play another match tomorrow, but then in a faster time control.
Absolutely. So tomorrow we will be here starting from 7 a.m. Eastern time or 1 p.m. Oslo time, the most important time zone, to cover Hikaru's playoff against Kartik Venkataraman. They will start with 2 games of 25 plus 10. We'll explain to you in more detail tomorrow. But for now, that is going to conclude today's coverage. Who is doing the coverage tomorrow? It will be Jon Ludwig and myself will be back for more. So hopefully you enjoyed today, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one and see you then.
Bye, everyone.
When I see some of these moves that computer suggests after a game that I play and I just go, wow, that is the beauty for me, because these are not moves that I would ever consider. And when I then see the move and then like I might make a couple of moves to try and understand why, that is the beauty to me. I feel like playing chess, yeah, I feel like hoping. I feel like playing chess, yeah, I feel like streaming. I'm just trying to play as well as I can, and I don't really worry. Like, if I lose a game, it's not the end-all be-all. I'm not naturally talented, but if I don't get something, I try to figure out, why don't I get it? What am I doing wrong? Over and over and over again. I feel like playing chess, and I feel like hoping. I feel like playing chess, and I feel like streaming.
Bye.